Welcome to World Gone Weird, discussing what the heck is going on in the world today.
Yeah, another week, another dose of what the heck is going on. Feels like the world's just spinning faster and faster, and not in a good way.
I know it's a lot to take in sometimes, isn't it? But maybe if we actually break it down and look at some of this, maybe we can make some sense of it all.
Or at least make a few darkly humorous observations along the way. Because honestly, if I didn't laugh, I would cry. So, what's on the menu for today's episode of Global Chaos, guys?
Well, the situation in the Congo seems to be escalating quickly, with the Rwanda-backed rebels apparently taking over Goma, a pretty major city over there, from what I understand.
Rwanda backed, huh? So it's not just a local squabble then. It's always more complicated than it seems, isn't it? Always somebody else pulling the strings from behind the curtain.
Right. I mean, this is a region that's been volatile for decades, really, with all the resource competition there. The article mentioned mineral wealth and the legacy of the Rwandan genocide. It's heartbreaking how these things keep getting replayed.
Mineral wealth? Oh, you mean the stuff that makes our smartphones and electric cars go? So basically, this is a high-stakes corporate scavenger hunt disguised as a political crisis. Got it.
Well, not necessarily just that, Sarah, although that is part of it, likely. I'm looking at this from a systems perspective. The way that these interconnected complex conflicts seem to continually arise, the constant feedback loops that push the system towards instability and chaos. It's not just about the mineral resources. It is a perfect example of the unintended consequences of all of these factors, acting in concert. There are the historical tensions, the political instability, the economic pressures all coming to a head.
Yeah, but it's hard to ignore the fact that these rebels are backed by Rwanda. I mean, the UN and even the US are saying it. And we're supposed to believe they're just defending minorities, right? It sounds like a convenient excuse for something else entirely.
It's a classic case of a proxy war, isn't it? Like when the article mentions Rwanda accusing the Congolese government of working with some of the Hutu militias who were involved in the 1994 genocide. So everyone's pointing fingers and playing their angles. It's just more people caught in the middle. And those poor civilians trying to flee to Goma and then having to flee again because the fighting is in Goma.
Oh, you mean those civilians who are now probably just trying to figure out how to charge their phones in the middle of a war zone because, priorities? I bet they're real excited about the complexities of international politics while they're dodging bullets.
And the fact that the UN and aid groups had to evacuate their staff from Goma is extremely concerning. It just amplifies the vulnerabilities of the local population. They're already dealing with displacement, with power cuts, and now they have even less access to outside assistance. The disruption to the entire system is really concerning when you look at it from a larger perspective.
Well, isn't that always the way? The UN, which is supposed to be this bastion of international cooperation, just ends up packing up and leaving when things get dicey. Seems like they're more concerned about their own people than the people they're supposed to be helping. I mean, what is the purpose of all that if they are not willing to be in the middle of the chaos?
I think you're being a bit harsh, Jimmy. It's a dangerous situation. They're there to provide aid, not to become casualties themselves. But it does highlight the limitations of these international organizations, you know? It just feels like we're putting band-aids on gaping wounds. It's the same with that situation with the Gaza ceasefire and the hostage release. Another complex mess.
Oh yeah, the Gaza situation? So they finally let people go back home only to find what? Piles of rubble? And after all that diplomatic hand-wringing and hostage haggling, I swear it's like a poorly written sitcom, only with real people's lives on the line.
Yeah, and the fact that this return was delayed because of a disagreement over one hostage release, and the supposed details behind that release, with claims and counterclaims by both sides, just highlights the utter lack of trust between the parties. The complexity of the situation is baffling. It's a perfect example of why modeling social systems is so difficult, because there are so many interdependent and nonlinear aspects to human behavior. The fact that one issue threatens to derail the whole agreement is very telling.
It is telling. The article mentions that Trump had this plan to clean out Gaza, moving all the Palestinians out to other countries. I mean, how is that not ethnic cleansing? It's just blatant. This isn't exactly nuanced, is it?
It's abhorrent, Jimmy. And the fact that he even discussed it with the leaders of Jordan and Egypt shows a total disregard for international law and the basic human rights of Palestinians. I was really struck by the statements from both Jordan and Egypt saying, no, we aren't housing anyone displaced from Gaza. Palestine is for Palestinians. It is just such a cruel and simplistic approach to such a deeply complex and emotional issue.
Oh, Trump's clean out plant plan. Right. Like it's a messy room that needs a bit of tidying up. Never mind the millions of people and their history and their lives. Just sweep them all away somewhere else. It's like something straight out of a dystopian movie. I'm picturing some poor intern with a giant broom trying to sweep everyone off the map.
And that's what's concerning, that this type of dehumanizing language, the way that language is used to frame conflict, makes such things seem palatable. When you look at the history, both in the context of that region and in the context of other conflicts, you start to see how easy it is for these types of policies to gain traction. It normalizes the concept of displacement, which has a long and very ugly history. This isn't just a random idea, it's a symptom of deeper, far more systemic and disturbing trends.
Yeah, and it's this kind of rhetoric that fuels the whole cycle of violence. You know, the kind of us versus them mentality and the willingness to just brush aside the humanity of the other side. It's like they're not even people, just numbers on a map, which is incredibly dangerous. It's like that old saying, all the world's a stage with terrible actors.
And those quotes from Palestinian leaders and human rights groups really just underscore the fear of further mass displacement and how it's connected to the Nakba and the 1967 war. These are not just random things, they have a very heavy historical weight for so many people. And all of that fear and emotion is just ignored in the rhetoric and in these suggested plans. It's like we learn nothing. We simply repeat all the same mistakes over and over.
Yeah, the Nakba, the Great Catastrophe. So, what, we're just going for a sequel now? Nakba 2. Electric Boogaloo? Honestly, humanity is a joke sometimes, and a very poorly written one at that.
And all of this is happening while we're seeing increasing complexity and chaos across the globe, not just in these two specific instances of conflicts. And then you have the issues with the media and algorithmic bias amplifying extreme views, which, as we've covered before, is just making things worse and worse. It feels like it's designed to divide, to drive engagement through outrage, rather than promote understanding. It creates these echo chambers, which means that people are no longer getting well-rounded views.
You know, it's like the algorithms are actively encouraging people to hate each other. The more divisive the content, the more clicks and engagement they get, and it just spirals out of control. These tech companies are acting like they have no responsibility for what's happening on their platforms.
That is a really good point, Jimmy. It's almost like there's no incentive to actually have a nuanced conversation or to find common ground. It just rewards the most extreme positions, which is a recipe for more conflict and division. And I mean, I even saw an article about the Lebanese/Israeli border and those protesters and all the fatalities there. The whole Middle East just feels like it's ready to ignite like a powder keg.
Oh, the Lebanese/Israeli border. So, a little bit of neighborly target practice. And then, when someone gets hurt, they're all shocked. It's like watching a bad reality show where all the characters are just completely oblivious to the consequences of their actions. The chaos, it's all a bit much.
It is a lot, Sarah. And it is all interconnected. That's the key thing that people seem to be missing. The conflict in Congo, the situation in Gaza, the issues on the Lebanon/Israeli border, all of this is happening within a larger global system that's already incredibly stressed. We cannot continue to look at these issues in isolation because they are all related. They are symptoms of a larger instability.
So, what's the solution then? Is there even one? It feels like we're just watching the world slowly descend into chaos, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's kind of depressing, to be honest.
Well, I refuse to believe that there's nothing we can do. We have to start by acknowledging the interconnectedness of these problems and the fact that there are underlying tensions, historical grievances, and economic factors. We have to find better ways to have constructive dialogues, even when those dialogues are difficult and painful. And we need to push back on this type of dehumanizing rhetoric that makes it easy to ignore the suffering of others.
Oh, constructive dialogue? You mean like those nice chats that just get ignored by everyone involved? Or the endless negotiations that lead to, well, more negotiations? Let's be real, Otto. This isn't a problem that can be fixed by talking it out in some kumbaya circle. I wish it was, but sadly I do not think it is. Maybe we just need to embrace the chaos?
Actually, Sarah, I think that there is something to be said for acknowledging the chaos, but not embracing it in a fatalistic way. If we look at it from a complex systems perspective, it's not about forcing a solution on the system. It's about understanding the variables that are driving the behavior and then attempting to nudge the system towards a more stable state by mitigating certain factors. And that's not just about diplomatic solutions, but about addressing the environmental and resource scarcity issues, economic disparities, and the spread of misinformation that are all contributing to the instability. There are feedback loops that we need to find ways to impact, to change the behavior.
So, it's not about finding a simple solution, but about addressing all these complex interacting issues. And how do we do that when people don't even agree on basic facts? You've got the various intel agencies coming up with completely different conclusions on things like the origins of COVID, as we've discussed before. It feels like we can't even agree on what the problems are, let alone the solutions.
right? And it's difficult to build trust when there are so many different narratives and so many conflicting accounts of events. I mean, the shift in the narrative on the origins of COVID is very concerning. I'm left with more questions than answers, particularly in regards to how information is shared and the levels of transparency between entities.
Oh yeah, the great COVID origins mystery. I swear they're just making it up as they go along. It's like a real-life game of Clue, only with global pandemics and no Colonel Mustard in the conservatory. It is all just a big distraction from all the other things. So much easier to focus on that than I don't know, the fact the planet is on fire.
And that is precisely the point, Sarah. These distractions, the noise, is what makes addressing the real issues even harder. It's like a smokescreen to obscure the larger systemic problems. And when these types of narratives take hold, and with algorithms designed to amplify this sort of sensationalism, it becomes even harder to promote any type of real understanding and to make progress towards solutions, if there are indeed solutions to these problems. There's a real breakdown in trust, and when there is no common ground, then there's little chance of people agreeing even about the problem, let alone any potential solutions. It's all a self-reinforcing negative feedback loop that makes any real progress incredibly difficult.
So we're basically screwed then? Is that what you're saying? Because honestly, that's how it feels. Like we're just watching the world implode in real time and nobody in charge has any idea what to do. And even if they did, nobody would agree on it anyway. I feel like we are all slowly being pulled into the undertow.
No, I don't think we're screwed, Jimmy. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, absolutely, but that doesn't mean we should give up. We need to build a more resilient system, which includes more community support, more transparency, more empathy and understanding. And yes, that's really, really hard and might seem pointless when we see the conflicts happening all around us. But we have to keep trying to find better solutions and to be active participants in the solution, instead of simply being overwhelmed by the problems. We have to act with intention, not just with reactivity.
Oh, intention? Like we all just need to try a little harder and everything will magically get better? Right. I mean, maybe we should all just start doing yoga and chanting world peace mantras while the world literally falls apart around us. It is all just too absurd.
Well, Sarah, the idea of individual action, mindfulness, and intention is not necessarily pointless. If you look at it from a complex systems lens, small individual changes can actually influence the system at a larger level, like a ripple effect. And while it's not a simple solution, it's a good place to start. Because if we don't address our individual reactions and cognitive biases, we will just get pulled into these negative feedback loops. So it's not about ignoring the problems, but rather addressing the system at different levels, from the individual to the global level. It's about how each individual acts and reacts in the system and making an effort to be more aware of these dynamics, so you can be an active and engaged participant in the change.
I guess. I mean, I hear you, but it feels so futile sometimes, Like, what difference is a mindful meditation going to make when we're talking about military interventions and geopolitical power plays? It just seems a bit detached from reality, to be honest.
It's not detached, Jimmy. It's about building the inner resilience that we all need to deal with these types of situations and to be able to think more clearly about solutions instead of reacting with fear and anger. And the small changes, over time, can become a kind of compounding interest to influence the whole, if it's approached with intention and consistency. It's about recognizing that we're all connected and that we need to start acting like it and creating a positive feedback loop instead of just letting the negative ones drag us down. I think that's very important for all of us, right?
I am not sure about all of that, Otto. But I do think that finding any humor in the face of all of this can be a coping mechanism. So maybe I should start a world peace yoga class where everyone wears silly hats. I think that might be more helpful than any political conversation at this point, because the current ones are just so utterly depressing. But that's all the time we have today, folks. I'm going to go try to find some funny cat videos.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening. And remember to keep questioning everything.